the daughter they ask to hide. The night my mother asked me to lie about my career, she called at 12:46 a.m. and said, "Tomorrow is about your brother. For once, please don't make people uncomfortable by talking about what you do." 20 hours later, I was sitting at the far end of her Thanksgiving table while she introduced me to my brother's future in-laws as our unmarried daughter who does paperwork for an engineering office. My brother smiled into his wineglass. My father stared at his plate. Nobody corrected her. Then my brother's future father-in-law stopped chewing, looked at me across the table, and said, "Maris Dalton?" My mother immediately laughed and told him he was confusing me with someone else. He did not laugh back. He stood, walked toward my chair, and asked me whether I had led the structural team that kept the Jefferson River Bridge from collapsing during the spring floods. I said yes. His wife pulled out her phone. My brother's fiancée stared at him. And the man my parents had spent 3 weeks trying to impress said, "Your daughter's work kept 30,000 people connected to the hospital district while the highway was underwater. Why did you tell us she files paperwork?" My mother's face went white. My brother whispered, "Can we not do this tonight?" That was when I realized they were not embarrassed by my career. They were embarrassed by any version of me that made their golden son look ordinary. My name is Maris Dalton. I was 35 years old that Thanksgiving, living in Minneapolis, and working as a structural engineer for a regional infrastructure firm that specialized in bridges, public buildings, and emergency repairs. I did not own a mansion. I did not have a husband. I did not have children. I lived in a 2-bedroom condo with a balcony full of dying herbs, drove a 7-year-old Subaru, and owned exactly one dress expensive enough to make my mother approve of the photographs. None of that bothered me until I went home. Home was Cedar Falls, Iowa, where my parents, Judith and Raymond Dalton, still lived in the same colonial house they bought when I was 5. My younger brother, Gavin, lived 12 minutes away with a leased Audi, a closet full of quarter-zip sweaters, and a job selling upgrades for a high-end residential builder. There was nothing wrong with Gavin's job. He was good at sales. People liked him quickly. He remembered names, laughed easily, and could make a customer feel like granite countertops were a spiritual decision. The problem was not Gavin's real life. The problem was the imaginary one my mother had built around it. In Judith Dalton's version of reality, Gavin was a regional development executive. He managed major projects. He was one promotion away from running the Midwest division. The actual title on his email signature was Senior Design Sales Consultant. He managed no employees. His largest professional responsibility was convincing buyers to upgrade cabinets before construction began. Again, honest work. But honest was never enough for my mother when impressive was available. I learned that early. My first memory of family hierarchy involved a refrigerator door. I was 9, and had won a county science fair with a model showing how soil erosion affected creek banks. My blue ribbon stayed on the refrigerator for 4 days. Then Gavin, who was 6, scored his first soccer goal. Mom replaced my ribbon with a photograph of him wearing shin guards and holding 2 thumbs up. I found my ribbon in the junk drawer under expired coupons. I put it back on the fridge. The next day it was gone again. That became a pattern I did not have language for yet. Gavin's achievements became family history. Mine became clutter. When I made honor roll, Mom said she expected that from me. When Gavin passed algebra after failing the first semester, she posted on Facebook about perseverance. When I received a scholarship to Iowa State, Dad congratulated me in the driveway because Mom was busy decorating for Gavin's baseball banquet. When I graduated near the top of my engineering class, Mom complained that the ceremony conflicted with Gavin's weekend softball tournament. She came eventually, but spent half the reception showing relatives photographs of his team. I kept trying harder because children are strange that way. We think love is a puzzle, and if we keep changing ourselves, eventually we will discover the correct answer. I studied more, worked summers, won awards, stopped asking for money, stopped causing emergencies. The better I became at taking care of myself, the easier it became for my parents to give their attention somewhere else. Maris is fine. Mom would say. Maris doesn't need us. People said that as though independence happened naturally, like freckles. Nobody asked how a girl becomes the one who never needs help. Sometimes she learns early that asking does not change who gets chosen. Dad was gentler than Mom, but almost more frustrating because he saw everything and treated silence as neutrality. When I was 16, I came home from a regional math competition with a plaque. Gavin had gotten into trouble that afternoon for sneaking beer into a friend's basement. Mom spent the entire evening comforting him because she feared the other parents would judge our family. I found Dad in the garage and asked whether he wanted to see my plaque. He smiled, said, "Of course, kiddo." Looked at it for perhaps 10 seconds, then said, "Your mother has a lot on her plate with your brother. Don't take it personally." I did take it personally. I just learned not to show it. That sentence became Dad's lifelong solution. Don't take it personally. Mom forgot my birthday dinner because Gavin had a work event. Don't take it personally. Mom introduced me to church friends as the serious one who lives up north somewhere. Don't take it personally. Mom posted family Christmas photographs where the only image containing me was the one she later cropped for her profile picture. Don't take it personally. Eventually, I stopped arguing with Dad because asking a passive person to defend you can become another form of begging. I left Iowa after college for an entry-level engineering position in Minneapolis. My first apartment had radiators that clanged all night and a bathroom door that would not close unless you lifted it slightly. I loved it. Nobody there knew I was the difficult daughter or Gavin's overly serious sister. At work, being detailed was useful instead of exhausting. Asking questions prevented mistakes instead of ruining dinner. I became good at assessing old structures because I liked finding the hidden reason something was failing. A crack rarely begins where people first notice it. Water gets inside, steel corrodes, loads shift. Somebody ignores a small warning because repairing it is inconvenient. Then one day everyone acts shocked that the structure cannot carry what they kept putting on it. There is probably a family metaphor in there. By 30, I was leading field inspections. By 32, I managed emergency response projects. My firm handled public schools, municipal buildings, and transportation structures across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. I spent nights on job sites in steel-toed boots, stood under bridges in January wind, and occasionally attended city meetings where residents yelled at me for closing lanes that would have been dangerous to keep open. It was not glamorous. I loved it. I once called Mom after receiving a state engineering award for a hospital parking structure retrofit that had saved the county millions in replacement costs. She interrupted me halfway through. "That's nice, honey. Did I tell you Gavin might get a company vehicle?" I said no. She talked for 20 minutes. The award plaque stayed in my desk drawer for nearly a year. Then came the Jefferson River flood. A brutal spring thaw pushed water over banks throughout southern Minnesota and damaged several transportation routes. One bridge connecting a hospital district and 3 surrounding communities developed a serious support problem after debris struck one of the piers. Closing it completely for months would force ambulances, staff, patients, and commuters into a 40-mile detour. Our team was brought in with state engineers to assess whether temporary reinforcement could keep limited traffic moving while permanent repairs were designed. I spent 16-hour days on site for nearly 2 weeks. Engineers do not save bridges alone, despite the way newspapers write headlines. Dozens of people were involved: inspectors, welders, contractors, transportation crews, emergency planners. I led the structural assessment team and developed part of the stabilization sequence. The bridge reopened to emergency vehicles within days and limited public traffic later. Local news covered it heavily because people had been terrified of losing access to the regional hospital. One reporter interviewed me while I was wearing a reflective jacket, hard hat, and enough mud to qualify as landscape. My mother saw the segment. I know because Aunt Celia texted, "Your mom says that bridge thing looked stressful." That was all. Mom never called. A month later, she posted 6 photographs from Gavin's Builder Awards dinner with the caption, So proud of our son for becoming one of the youngest leaders in his company. He had received a quarterly sales plaque. I liked the post. I wish I could tell you I had stopped caring by then. I had not. My adult brain understood the pattern. The little girl who kept putting her ribbon back on the refrigerator still existed underneath it. Gavin and I were complicated. He was not cruel all the time. That matters. He called me when his first serious girlfriend dumped him. He helped Dad rebuild my porch steps one summer while visiting Minneapolis. He sent me stupid memes during overnight inspections. But he also benefited from being the chosen one and rarely questioned the arrangement. When Mom exaggerated his achievements, he smiled. When she diminished mine, he stayed quiet. Once, at Christmas, she told my uncle I worked behind the scenes for an engineering company. Gavin was standing beside us. He knew I was a project lead. I looked at him. He shrugged. Later he said, "Why does it matter? You know what you do." "Because you know what I do too," I thought, and you watched her erase it. But I said nothing. That was my part in the pattern. I kept accepting private affection from people who allowed public disrespect. The engagement changed everything. Gavin met Sloane Pierce at a charity cycling event. Sloane was 30, a physical therapist, warm without being performative, and one of those people who asked a question and actually waited for the answer. I liked her immediately. More importantly, Gavin seemed calmer around her, less interested in impressing everyone. He proposed 18 months later. Mom reacted as though the royal family had requested an alliance when she learned about Sloane's parents. Her mother, Elise Pierce, ran a pediatric rehabilitation nonprofit. Her father, Malcolm Pierce, was a retired civil engineering professor who had spent 8 years as Iowa's state transportation commissioner before returning to academia and advisory work. He was respected, well-connected, and exactly the kind of person Mom became desperate around. Suddenly, every detail of our family needed polishing. Gavin's actual job title was upgraded again. Dad's old management role at a manufacturing plant became senior operations leadership. Their house became the family property, as if acreage had magically appeared behind the garage, and I became the problem. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Mom called to say Sloane's parents would be joining us for dinner because the families wanted an informal engagement celebration. "You can come if you want," she said. I noticed the wording. Am I invited or tolerated? Maris, don't start. I'm asking. Of course you're invited, but please understand this is important for Gavin. Everything was important for Gavin. She told me Malcolm had worked with governors, universities, transportation boards, and large companies. He's very traditional, she said. I don't want controversial conversations. I design bridges, Mom. I'm not joining a militia. You know what I mean. Your work can get political. Concrete does not vote. She ignored that. Then came the part I almost thought I imagined. If they ask what you do, just say you work in project support for an engineering company. I laughed. Why would I say that? Because nobody wants to hear a woman talk all night about structural failures and disasters. I don't talk all night about anything. Maris, please. Gavin is marrying into a respected family. I don't want you correcting everyone or getting intense. Intense. Family translation. Visible. I told her I would think about coming. She responded with a disappointed silence, long enough to turn my boundary into an injury. 2 days later, Dad called. Your mother's worried you're upset. She asked me to lie about my career. Not lie, simplify. What should Gavin say? What do you mean? Should he simplify his title too? Dad sighed. Can you not make everything equal? That sentence told me more than he meant. Why shouldn't it be? Because this dinner is about him. I nearly declined then. Sloane changed my mind accidentally. She texted me privately. I'm really hoping you come for Thanksgiving. Gavin talks about you like you're the only person who can beat him at arguments. Also, my dad is an engineering nerd and will probably corner you if he learns you're in the field. I stared at the message. Gavin had apparently told Sloane more truth about me than Mom planned to allow at dinner. I wrote back that I would come. The night before Thanksgiving at 12:46 a.m., Dad called. I thought something had happened. Instead, he whispered, "Your mother wants to make sure we're all on the same page tomorrow." In the background, Mom said loudly, "Give me the phone." Then her voice filled my dark bedroom. "Maris, listen carefully. Malcolm Pierce knows everybody in transportation. Do not turn dinner into some career networking thing. I wasn't planning to. And don't bring up that bridge project unless somebody specifically asks." Fine. Actually, it's better if you just say you do paperwork for an engineering office. I sat up. Mom, no. Why do you need credit for everything? My job is not credit, it is my life. There. That tone. That is what I mean. Sloane's family does not need to see you competing with Gavin. I am not competing with Gavin. Then prove it by letting him have one night. Something in me went tired rather than angry. I could have stayed home. I almost did. Then I thought about Sloane, who had personally asked me to come, and Gavin, who had called 2 days earlier asking whether I could arrive early because he was nervous. I told Mom, I will not make a speech about work, but I will not lie if someone asks me directly. She said, "Just don't embarrass us." Then she hung up. Thanksgiving morning, I drove 4 hours south through sleet and gray sky. I wore black trousers, a cream sweater, and the navy blazer I had worn while presenting the Jefferson River Stabilization Plan to state transportation officials. Not because I expected anyone to recognize it, because I needed one thing on my body that belonged entirely to the life my mother kept trying to edit. I arrived before noon. Mom opened the door and immediately looked at my clothes. "That's a little formal. Happy Thanksgiving to you too." She let me inside. The house smelled like turkey, sage, and the cinnamon candles Mom burned every holiday, whether anyone liked them or not. Gavin was in the kitchen wearing an expensive sweater and looking genuinely relieved to see me. He hugged me. "You came. You sound surprised." He lowered his voice. "Mom's been weird. Your powers of observation remain unmatched." He gave me the old little brother grin. For a moment I saw us at 15 and 11 rebuilding Grandpa's garden shed. Then Mom called him away to check the wine labels. In the living room, the mantel had been rearranged for Thanksgiving. 4 framed photographs of Gavin filled the center. Graduation, dealership award dinner, engagement photo, charity bike event with Sloane. At the far edge was an old family picture where I stood partly hidden behind Dad. I actually smiled. The refrigerator had become a mantel. The experiment had lasted 26 years. Mom had place cards on the dining table. Gavin and Sloane sat near the center with Malcolm and Elise opposite them. Mom and Dad flanked the group. My cards sat at the far end beside Aunt Celia and the kitchen doorway. "Convenient for helping," Mom said when she saw me notice. "Of course." 15 minutes before the Pierces arrived, she asked me to refill water glasses, move serving dishes, and put my purse upstairs because it makes the entry look cluttered. I had been home 20 minutes and was already functioning like staff. Sloane arrived first with her parents. She hugged me before my mother could intercept. "You made it!" Malcolm Pierce looked familiar from public hearings and engineering conferences, though we had never formally met outside professional settings. He was tall, silver-haired, with the slightly distracted posture of someone whose mind was usually still considering whatever problem he had last seen. Elise was warm and observant. Mom introduced Gavin with full ceremony. "Our son Gavin, Senior Development Leadership with Lennox Residential." Gavin's eyes flickered toward me. His actual employer was Lennox Homes. His title was still Senior Design Sales Consultant. Malcolm shook his hand and asked what development leadership involved. Gavin opened his mouth. Mom answered for him. "He works across their largest projects, coordinates teams, clients, design decisions, very high responsibility." Sloane looked at Gavin. He said quietly, "Mostly buyer design and sales." Mom talked over him. Then she reached me. "And this is Maris. She lives up in Minneapolis and does administrative project work for an engineering office." Malcolm's eyes moved to my face. "Maris Dalton?" Mom laughed. "Yes, but nobody famous. I wanted the floor to open, not from embarrassment about myself. From watching a 60-year-old woman race to make her own child smaller before somebody could accidentally respect her, Malcolm shook my hand slowly. Have we met? Not formally. Mom stepped between the conversation. Dinner is almost ready. Elise's eyebrows rose. Sloane gave me a questioning look. I said nothing. We sat. The first 20 minutes followed Mom's script. Gavin's work. The wedding. Sloane's clinic. Malcolm's years in public service. Mom told a story about Gavin winning a sales award and somehow turned a gift certificate into evidence of leadership. Every time conversation drifted toward me, she redirected it. Elise asked whether Minneapolis felt like home. Mom asked Gavin about wedding transportation. Malcolm asked what branch of engineering I worked around. Mom told him the potatoes were getting cold. Aunt Celia asked if I had been traveling for work. Mom announced dessert options. It became so obvious that I stopped feeling crazy. Sloane noticed. Elise noticed. Gavin definitely noticed and looked increasingly ashamed. Dad performed his lifelong disappearing act, carving turkey into pieces small enough to avoid eye contact. Then Mom asked for a photograph before dinner got messy. She positioned Gavin and Sloane in front of the fireplace with Malcolm, Elise, herself, and Dad. I stepped beside Aunt Celia. Mom handed me her phone. Maris, take a couple. There it was. I looked at the group. Am I not in the family picture? Mom smiled tightly. We'll do another. This is the engagement family first. I am Gavin's sister. Don't make this weird. Sloane immediately said. Maris should be in it. Gavin nodded. Yeah, Mom. Put the phone on a timer. Mom's expression hardened for half a second before she recovered. We took the photograph. I stood at the edge. Mom later posted a cropped version where half my shoulder disappeared. I know because I saw it that night. But first, we had to survive dinner. Malcolm began watching me differently after the photograph. Not suspiciously, thoughtfully. He asked Gavin about housing demand. Then he asked me whether my engineering office worked mostly private or public projects. Mom said, "Oh, Maris really doesn't get into the technical side." That was the moment something changed in Gavin's face. "Mom," he said quietly. "Stop." She stared at him. "What?" "She's an engineer." Mom gave a small laugh. "Obviously she has an engineering degree. I mean, she works with project teams." Gavin put down his fork. "She leads them." Silence. My mother looked at him as though he had betrayed state secrets. Malcolm turned toward me. "Structural?" "Yes. Buildings, bridges and public structures mostly." His eyes sharpened. "Minneapolis?" "Mostly upper Midwest." He stared for a moment. Then he said my name again. "Maris Dalton." I knew what was coming before Mom did. Malcolm leaned back. "Jefferson River Bridge." Nobody moved. Mom said, "What bridge?" Malcolm looked almost amused now, but not in a cruel way. "The spring floods. Emergency stabilization outside Rochester." Your daughter was the structural lead who presented the reopening plan to the state response team. My mother laughed too quickly. "Oh, I'm sure there were many people." "There were," I said. "Dozens." Malcolm nodded. "Which is why I remember the team lead who refused to let the commissioner reopen general traffic 24 hours early, despite political pressure." Sloane stared at me. Elise said, "That was you?" Mom tried again. "Maris tends to make things sound bigger than they are." Malcolm's expression changed. "Mrs. Dalton." I watched her presentation. The room went silent. She was the person arguing that emergency access could resume safely while public traffic needed additional reinforcement. She was right. Had officials rushed it, we could have damaged the temporary supports before permanent shoring was installed. Mom's face emptied. Gavin whispered, "Jesus." Malcolm turned to me. "I wrote a note to your firm afterward. Your team handled that situation exceptionally well." "I remember. Thank you." Elise looked at Mom. "Why did you say she does administrative work?" The question landed like a dropped plate. Mom reached for her water. I simplified. "Maris hates attention." Sloane said. "She didn't look like she hated attention. She looked like she was being prevented from answering." Dad cleared his throat. Nobody rescued Mom. Then she said the line that broke something permanently. This dinner is about Gavin. Maris has always struggled when somebody else is getting attention. I actually felt my childhood rearrange itself inside me. Every ribbon, every award, every photograph. Every time I was accused of competing because I asked not to disappear. Before I could speak, Gavin said, "That's not true." Mom turned toward him. "Excuse me?" He looked terrified, which told me how much courage the next sentence cost him. "Maris never competed with me. You made everything a competition." Dad finally raised his eyes. Sloane stayed perfectly still. Gavin continued. "You exaggerate my job every time you talk about me. She has an actual major career, and you lie about it." "That's insane." Mom's eyes filled. "I was trying to make a good impression for you. By humiliating my sister? I was protecting you." "From what?" Gavin's voice cracked. "Her being successful?" That question ended the performance. Dad put down his fork. "Judith," she snapped at him. "Don't you start." Something in him finally moved. "No, he's right." I nearly dropped my glass. Dad looked at me. "And I should have said it years ago." Mom began crying. Real tears, though tears do not automatically make the person crying correct. "Everybody is turning on me in my own house," Elise said calmly. "No one is turning on you. People are correcting what you said." Mom looked at her. "You don't understand our family. I understand enough to know one daughter has been asked to lie, so another child can look more impressive." Malcolm said nothing for several seconds. Then he turned to Gavin. "Since honesty appears to be tonight's theme, what is your actual position?" Gavin closed his eyes. Mom immediately said, "Malcolm, that's unnecessary." Sloane looked at Gavin. "I want him to answer." Gavin swallowed. "Senior design sales consultant." "Do you manage people?" Malcolm asked. "No." "Are you a development director?" "No." Sloane pushed her chair back slightly. "You told me you were likely moving into regional management. My supervisor said there might be an opening next year." "That is not what you told me." Gavin's face crumpled. "I know," Mom interrupted. He was trying to present himself confidently. "There is nothing wrong with ambition." Sloane looked at her future mother-in-law. "There is something wrong with building a relationship on edited facts." Gavin said, "Sloane, I never meant—" "Did you know your mom told my parents Maris had emotional problems?" My head snapped toward Mom. "What?" Sloane looked horrified that I did not know. "She told my mother you were fragile and that we shouldn't ask personal questions because city life had been difficult for you." I stared at my mother. "You told them I was mentally unstable?" "I never said unstable," Elise spoke. "You said Maris had struggled emotionally for years and that the family tried not to pressure her." Mom's hands were shaking now. "I was trying to explain why she's distant. I live 4 hours away because of my career." "And you barely come home?" "Because every time I come home you erase me." My voice stayed quiet, which made Mom look more frightened. "You tell people I failed out of college. You tell relatives I have depression. You call my career office work. You crop me out of photographs. Then when I notice, you say I'm jealous of Gavin." "I never said you failed out." Aunt Celia spoke from beside me. "Judith, you told me 3 years ago that Maris never finished the program she originally wanted." Mom glared at her sister. Celia shrugged. "You did." Suddenly the room became an archive. People began remembering. Dad remembered Mom telling neighbors I had changed paths because Minneapolis was too much. Gavin remembered her deleting one of my comments from a family post because she said it would confuse people. Sloane remembered asking for my number months earlier, and Mom saying I preferred distance. I sat there listening to years of small lies return from different mouths. The strangest thing was I no longer felt desperate to prove anything. The truth was proving itself without my help. Mom stood abruptly. "Enough. This was supposed to be a celebration." Malcolm remained seated. "Celebrations built on dishonesty rarely stay celebrations." Mom pointed at me. "Are you happy now?" "Of course." The ancient question. Someone hurts you. The truth surfaces, and suddenly your emotional reaction becomes the scandal. "No." I stood too. "I'm exhausted." Gavin stared at me. Maris, don't leave. Why? Because I'm sorry. For tonight? For years. His voice broke. I knew she lied about you. Not everything, but enough. And I let it happen because it made my life easier. There it was, not Mom's manipulation, his choice. I nodded. Thank you for saying that. He looked surprised that forgiveness did not immediately follow. Sloane pulled the engagement ring from her finger. Mom made a sound like she had been struck. Gavin looked at Sloane. Please don't. Sloane placed the ring beside her plate. I'm not ending us forever tonight. But I'm not planning a wedding while I don't know which version of you is real. Mom said. You cannot punish him for something his mother did. Sloane looked directly at Gavin. I'm not. I'm reacting to what he allowed. Gavin started crying silently. I hated watching it. He was still my brother. Boundaries do not turn love off like a switch. Malcolm stood. I think we should go. Mom panicked. Please, we can start over. I made one mistake. Elise answered softly. This table contains evidence it was not one mistake. Before leaving, Malcolm shook my hand. For what it's worth, Miss Dalton, your professional reputation does not need defending in this room or anywhere else. I smiled. Thank you. Mom heard it. Her face twisted. Of course. Now everyone's impressed with Maris. That's what she wanted. Something inside me finally released. No, Mom. I wanted you to be. She went still. I put on my coat. Dad stood beside the doorway. Kiddo. I waited. His eyes were wet. I'm sorry I kept telling you not to take it personally when it was personal. That was perhaps the first useful thing he had said about the pattern in 25 years. Thank you. Can we talk? Not tonight. Okay. He accepted it. That mattered. I drove back to Minneapolis through freezing rain and silence. My phone buzzed for the first hour. Mom, Gavin, Dad, Aunt Celia. I turned it face down. At a rest stop halfway home, I made the mistake of opening social media. Mom had posted the engagement family photograph taken before dinner. She used the cropped version. My shoulder was barely visible at the edge. Caption. A beautiful Thanksgiving celebrating Gavin and Sloane. Family is everything. Sloane had already removed her relationship status. Gavin was still tagged. I stared at Mom's caption and almost laughed. Even after the truth exploded at her table, she had uploaded the edited photograph anyway. Image first, reality later. I took a screenshot, then unfollowed her. Not blocked, not dramatic. I simply stopped volunteering to watch someone curate my disappearance. The messages waiting at home were predictable. Mom, you humiliated me in front of important people. Mom, your brother may lose the love of his life because you could not let one evening be about him. Mom, I hope your career is worth what you did to this family. Gavin's messages were different. She's blaming you. I told her to stop. Then, Sloane went to her parents' hotel. I'm giving her space. Then, after midnight. I'm sorry I never defended you. I don't expect you to answer. Dad wrote only, I should have moved your picture years ago. That sentence confused me until I remembered the mantle. Dad remembered too. I cried then. Not at dinner. Not when Mom called me unstable through careful euphemisms. I cried alone in my condo because the parent who had spent his life pretending not to see had finally admitted he saw. The next 6 weeks were the quietest I had ever experienced with my family. I did not go home for Christmas. I spent it with coworkers, a divorced neighbor, and her teenage son. We ate lasagna because nobody wanted turkey. Nobody asked me to take the picture. When my neighbor set her phone on a timer, she pulled me toward the center because I was standing near the edge out of habit. You're tall, she said. Back row, middle. Such an ordinary instruction. It nearly broke me. Mom sent gifts. I returned none, but I did not call. She sent one text Christmas morning. I miss my daughter. I responded, I miss having a mother who knows who her daughter is. She did not answer. Gavin started therapy. Sloane postponed the wedding indefinitely, but did not end the relationship. She told him she needed to see whether he could become honest without crisis forcing him. He called me once in January. I've been thinking about the refrigerator. I laughed because I had never told him my private name for those childhood tests. What refrigerator? Your science ribbon. I stopped breathing for a second. You remember that? Yeah. Mom took it down because my soccer picture looked better with the magnets. I stared out my condo window at snow gathering on the balcony railing. I thought I imagined part of that. You didn't. He was quiet. I think she trained me to think your success was a threat. You were 6. I'm 31 now. That was the difference. Childhood explains. Adulthood chooses. Gavin apologized for the years he had chosen convenience, not with one perfect speech, over months. He corrected relatives when they called me dramatic. He told his employer's title accurately. He stopped letting Mom write captions about his career. When she posted that he had accepted a leadership role, he commented publicly, "Still in sales, Mom. Please stop upgrading me." She deleted the post. I laughed for 10 minutes. Sloane noticed too. By spring, she began wearing the ring again, but they moved the wedding back a full year. "We're rebuilding before we celebrate," she told me. I respected that. Dad started therapy as well, though he called it talking to someone at the community center, for the first 3 months because apparently the word therapy threatened his masculinity. He called me every Sunday at first. I told him weekly calls felt like overcorrection. We settled on every other week. He began asking about my projects, and the first few conversations were painfully awkward because he knew almost nothing about what I had spent 13 years doing. "So when you say load rating," he once asked, "is that like weight capacity?" I smiled. "Basically." "Huh." Then he listened. He did not redirect to Gavin. It was not enough to recover the missed years, but it was different behavior. Mom took longer because Mom had more to lose. The family image had been her life's project. Admitting she diminished me meant admitting the beautiful family she presented to church friends and social media had always required one child to stand off camera. She spent 2 months sending apologies with explanations attached. "I'm sorry, but you were always intimidating. I'm sorry, but Gavin needed confidence. I'm sorry, but you chose to live far away." I stopped responding. Then in March, a handwritten letter arrived. 6 pages. No demand that I forgive her. No mention of Malcolm Pierce, the engagement, or embarrassment. She wrote about the refrigerator. She admitted she remembered removing my ribbon. "You were already so capable," she wrote. "Gavin seemed to need praise more, and I told myself you would understand." Every year after that, the same decision became easier. I rewarded the child who needed me loudly and neglected the child who learned not to ask. Then, when you succeeded without me, I felt ashamed instead of proud because your success proved how little I had participated in it. Rather than face that, I minimized it. I read that paragraph 5 times. It was the first time she had named the real thing. Later she wrote, "I think I made Gavin larger because it made me feel like a successful mother, and I made you smaller because I did not know how to take credit for a life you built without my help." That one hurt differently. It was ugly and honest. I called her 3 days later. We talked for 40 minutes. I told her I was willing to rebuild but not return. No more invented mental health stories. No more false job descriptions. No more cropping photographs as family policy. No more asking me to be quiet to protect Gavin. If she did it again, I would leave the conversation rather than argue. She cried. "That sounds like you're threatening to walk away. It's telling you what I will do. What if I mess up?" "You probably will." She laughed through tears. "You always were blunt. You always called accuracy blunt when it made you uncomfortable." Fair. That word from her was new. I drove home to Cedar Falls in May. No holiday, no engagement, no audience. Dad opened the door and hugged me before saying anything. Mom stood inside wearing an old sweatshirt instead of presentation clothes. The first thing I noticed was the mantle. Gavin's photographs were still there. Mine had been added. College graduation. One professional photo from the Jefferson River Project, and a ridiculous childhood picture of me holding the erosion model with my science fair ribbon pinned crookedly to my shirt. The fake ivy plant was gone. I looked at Mom. Subtle. She wiped her eyes. "I considered a banner. Please don't. We ate sandwiches at the kitchen table. At some point, she asked how engineers decide whether a damaged bridge can stay open. It was not a sophisticated question. It may have been the most important one she ever asked me. I explained load paths, inspections, temporary shoring, uncertainty, and why pressure from people who want a quick answer can be dangerous. She listened. When I finished, she said, "That sounds like a lot of responsibility." I nodded. It is. She did not mention Gavin. Progress. The following Thanksgiving, we tried again. Smaller table. Sloane and Gavin were together but still unmarried. Malcolm and Elise came because apparently they possessed more optimism than I did. Mom did not use place cards. When everyone arrived, she asked me to help set the phone timer for a group picture, then came and stood beside me, rather than handing me the camera. Nobody was at the edge. During dinner, Malcolm asked about a school retrofit project I was working on. Mom listened. Then she told him, "Maris is leading it. Just 4 words. Accurate. No inflation. No apology hidden inside." Gavin later joked that Mom had finally discovered factual reporting. I told him not to get excited. Sloane laughed. Mom did too. That was perhaps the first family joke in years where nobody had to become smaller for everyone else to enjoy it. I do not want to give you a fake ending where one dinner repaired childhood. It did not. There are still moments when Mom falls into old habits. She once introduced Gavin as one of the top people at Lennox, and he corrected her before I could look up. She once told a neighbor I was always traveling for important projects, with enough pride that I almost reminded her she used to call the same work office paperwork. I let that one go. Healing does not require auditing every sentence for historical symmetry. What matters is the direction of the pattern. Dad speaks now when Mom crosses a line. Gavin no longer accepts praise built on comparison. I no longer stay at tables where the price of peace is disappearing. That last part matters most. For decades, I thought my family had the power to decide whether I belonged because they controlled the mantle, the captions, the seating charts, the stories told to neighbors. They did not. They only controlled whether I belonged comfortably inside their version of me. I controlled whether I kept showing up for it. Self-worth did not arrive when Malcolm recognized me. His respect felt good, but external validation from a respected man is not the lesson. If he had never seen my work, my mother's lie would still have been a lie. I had already led teams, rebuilt public structures, mentored younger engineers, paid my bills, built friendships, survived heartbreak, and created a life I respected. The tragedy was not that my family failed to announce those achievements. It was that I kept treating their announcement as the final certification. I do not anymore. The old science fair ribbon sits in a frame in my Minneapolis office now. Dad found it in a box in the basement after the engagement dinner. Mom had not thrown it away. She had stored it with school papers. For years, I thought that detail might make the story softer. It does not. Keeping something hidden is different from displaying it with pride. But I framed it anyway. Not because I needed Mom to move it to the center of her refrigerator, but because the 9-year-old who built that erosion model deserved one adult in her future to say, "This mattered." I became that adult. That may be the quietest form of self-worth. Becoming the witness you kept waiting for. So tell me honestly, if your parents spent years shrinking your accomplishments to protect the sibling they favored, then asked you to lie about your own life in front of people they wanted to impress, would a sincere apology and years of changed behavior be enough for you to rebuild the relationship, or would you decide that once a family teaches you how easily it can erase you, distance is the only place you can finally stay visible?